Cool. So we're officially recording. We're starting it off, and we're kicking off the second ever Firehose Lightning Talks. We're really excited. So we have a number of really awesome talks lined up. Nico's going first. We're just going to talk about supporting multiple languages from a Rails app. After that, Maya's going to talk about Foundation, the front-end framework. Colin's going to talk about Action Cable, and Chris is going to talk about GitHub or Git rebasing. Michaela's going to talk about reading code that you didn't write. Eric's going to talk about building an awesome podcast. And Chris Salvi's going to talk about ECMA script 6 and the keyword this in JavaScript. So I guess there's no need to sort of belabor the point. Let's just get into the talk. I'm really excited. So Nico, you're up first. Why don't you take the scene, share your screen, and we can get started with this.
All right. Oh. Okay, everyone sees the presentation, or?
We see your terminal window now.
Okay. I'll do it like this.
It's play.
Is it working now? Are you seeing the presentation?
So we see your presentation plus here we go. This is perfect.
Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, welcome everyone to my very first lightning talk about Rails internationalization. So I'm Nico van Kamp, a wannabe web developer living in Belgium and currently enrolled in the Firehose program. So today I'll try to give a hands-on session on how to make a multi-language Rails application from scratch. Okay, so I'll do this by a step-by-step approach, and I would love to start with an introduction and show the application that we'll be making multilingual. Okay, so this is the application. We have a homepage that lists several beers. Every beer has a rating, and we can click detail for a beer and read a small description, and we're reading that Duvel is the best beer in the world according to Nico, and we can go back. And basically that is the application that we will make multilingual. So the first step that we need to do is we need to translate our static text. So in this case here, the title should be translated. In order to do that, we need to find the static text that we want to internationalize in our view template, and then we need to extract it out so that it can be loaded dynamically based on the user selected language. So let's start with that. I'll open my index file, and we have our title here. And this title needs to be replaced with a translation. Rails makes it fairly easy to do that. We can do that by replacing this text with call method, the T method. T stands for translate, and then we need to pass in a unique key to identify that text. So we'll use beers.title. If we save this and refresh our browser, we see that the title is replaced and we retitle here. So let's inspect this and see what's happening. And it says that our translation is missing. And this actually makes totally sense, because here in the index file, we only created a unique key that we will use to make the translation. So the next thing we need to do is actually translate this unique key. And Rails default setup is that this is managed in YAML files, and those are stored in the config folder, locales, and then here we have the English language. There's already some default content. I'll replace this now with here beers, title, and I'll place the title in here. You actually want to note that here in the beers .title, the period here is represented in the YAML file by nesting it in, so beers title. If we now refresh our homepage, we see that the title is actually appearing as it should. Now we have our English YAML file, but for this demo, I want to use a second language. So I'll create a new YAML file for a new language, and I'll use a Dutch language. So I'll create a YAML file for it. I'll copy this over, paste it in here. I change here the EN to the NL, and I'll translate my title by saying okay. We save this, and now you really have to pay attention. Every time you add a new YAML file, you should restart your Rails server, because if not, Rails won't pick up the extra YAML file. So we restart our server, we refresh our page, and everything is still working and both languages are translated. So actually that's the first issue that we tackled, and now we should go on to the second one. Now we actually want to make sure that the user can select a language, because as of now, there's no possibility to do that. And I already created a drop-down field here for the language selection menu. So let us build now the links where the user can actually choose what language he wants to have served by the web application. So we'll have to edit our navbar. I'll replace this here with language. And then I'll create my links to set a locale. So link to the English version, and I'll provide the locale English. And then we also need to add a possibility for the second language, Dutch. Okay, we save this up, we go back to our browser, and the drop-down menu changed. We have the language appearing here. We can use the drop-down selection, select English, and select Dutch. At this point, there really isn't happening that much. The only thing that happens is in our URL. The locale param is passed to the URL. So the next thing we need to do is the locale param that is given in the URL, we need to check this and change the language based on it. And the Rails convention to do that is create a before filter in the applications controller. So let's do that now. So I'll create a before filter, and I'll name the filter set locale. Next, I'll create a private method for it, set locale. And here we actually have to make sure that the language that the user chose is passed to the IATN locale value. So, and in this case, this actually would be the params that are given to the URL, so the locale params. I want to make sure that if no params are given, that Rails would use the default language, and Rails default language is English, so I'll define that here as well. If there's no param available, then we use the default locale. Okay, I'll save this. Go to my application, change the language again, and great, our title is actually appearing in Dutch like it should be. So another issue is solved. Up to the next step. We should make the language choice persistent. What do I mean by that? Now, if I check an individual page, the language preference is gone. If I go back to the home page, again, the language preference is gone. So we need to make sure that Rails remembers this preference. And you might think that you want to store the language selection in a session or a cookie, but that's really not the right way to do it. Because I learned that the Rails convention says that the locale actually should be transparent and part of a URL. And this way you won't break people's basic assumptions about the web itself. If you send a URL to a friend, a colleague, family member, they should exactly see the same page and content as you. And by using cookies or storing this information in a cookie, we will prevent that. And in developer terms, we actually want to make sure that our application is RESTful. So how will we solve this? What I want is that if language params are given, I want them to persist in the URL like this. If it's English, I want to have it like this. And if it's Dutch, I want to have it like this. That's actually what I want to achieve. So let's go back to our editor and open the routes file to do that. And the way we do this is by using the scope methods, and we will scope our locale param in before all these routes that we already defined. Okay, we save the file. We go to our web page again, and we refresh. And we're getting an error. Okay, let's see what's actually happening here. The reason why this error occurs is that our locale param that we have here, that the product data, in this case here, the beer data, is actually being passed as a locale option. So we need to resolve that. And luckily for us, Rails is a very convenient framework and has a method to help us with this. So we need to define this method in our applications controller. And the method is called the default URL options. And by using this method, Rails will actually call this method to determine the default options that should be passed into the URL generators. So provide options. And here in this case, the option that we should, the param that we actually should set is locale, and the locale should be equal to the I18 locale that we set up before. If we save this and we go back to our application and we refresh this, then everything is working like it should. We can still change our languages, go to another page and go back. So we've done a lot already, but there's a last thing we need to do to improve our routing. That's the last step. Because at this moment, if I would hand in this URL, I get an error that beers is not a valid locale. So Rails actually considers the beers as a locale param and can't find it because we only have the English and Dutch one defined. So what we should do is in our routes file, we have our scope locale. We should make that more restrictive and say there are only a certain values of the locale param that we will accept. And in this case, that would be only the English one and the Dutch one. And in case that neither the English nor the Dutch locale param is given, you shouldn't use the locale param at all. So we make this optional. We save our file, we refresh, and it's working as intended because it's now serving the default language. There's one minor thing we could do to improve our code. In here, we hard-coded our locales. So if in the future you would need to add another language, you have to change your routes file again. And that's something we want to prevent. And we can do this by calling the I18 available locales. And this will actually provide us or return us an array, and that we can join by pipe. And it should be working then. So in the future, if we would like to add another language, it would be as easy as adding the other YAML files. So that's basically it for my lightning talk. In my presentation, I have several more tips and tricks that you could read into and ask me questions about it, but I think I'm already over my time, so you can look into those if you're interested in it. Are there any questions?
I've got a question. Actually, I got a couple of questions.
Okay.
Do you have to manually go in and do all of the translations, or do they have like language packs you can do to pair together for dictionary searches or something like that?
Yeah. Okay. So that's really a good question.
Which I'm sure your slides answer.
So perfect question, Colin. Thanks for that. So for a small application like this, managing the YAML files is really easy, but for a larger application, it can be a really painful experience. And you can use different alternative backends to manage those applications. I tried several of them, and I preferred the locale app the most, and you have a link to that. So that makes it a lot easier also to work as a group on the translations, have a clear overview of how many % of the application is already translated and stuff like that.
Okay. And then does it, when you load your website, does it load up both translations at the same time, or only when you select the language?
I think, I actually don't know. So that's a good question. I know that it's loaded based on the user's selected languages, but I don't know if it's preloaded or not. So I would have to check into that.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious if like you had 20 languages on there, if they're all going to load all at once, and if that's going to have any sort of performance setbacks for your application. I would imagine you would only load it when you select the language. But.
Yeah.
So I have a question. I have a feeling that you have a slide for this one too. What do you do about user inputted data? So like we as developers can be like nice and sort of translate stuff into multiple languages, but like it's hard to be like users, you should be translating stuff into 9 languages, like you might not know them. So how do you, are there like workarounds, or like what approaches do people take about that stuff?
So you're actually talking about database content that needs to be translated?
Exactly, yeah.
So then there's only one solution, and you should use Global Gem, which is actually the standard library for all active record model translation.
So just will automatically translate it?
Well, if you want to translate things, my advice is always don't translate yourself, but look if somebody else already made the translations. So there's a really useful repository, Ruby on Rails IATN, and there's a lot of information over there. There are predefined translations for most languages, like days, weeks, years, currency, stuff like that. And then another advice is if you install a particular gem, just immediately do Google search for gem IATN. And there are a lot of popular gems that already have the different translations of all the fields done. For example, I've used Device myself, and it works flawlessly.
Awesome.
Solid talk.
Anybody else have any questions or? Cool, good stuff. Well, Nico, well done. Live coding on the fly, like kudos to that. That's sort of like a dangerous situation.
Yeah, very scary.
A lot of things can go wrong, and nothing did. So congrats, like it went flawlessly, and super, super impressed. Excellent talk.
Okay, thanks.
Thumbs up. Thumbs up.
All right, next up we got Mayo. Mayo's going to talk about the foundation front-end framework. So Mayo, why don't you take it away?
Hey everybody, how's it going? My name is, let me share the screen real quick. Actually, let me just share the desktop. Okay, Can you see it?
Yeah, we can see your slide, but not in presentation mode. And now I think it's perfect.
Okay. So, hey everybody, my name is Mayo, and today I'm going to be talking about ZERP Foundation with Ruby on Rails. And this is a lightning talk hosted by the Firehose Project. And I put the logo here, a couple logos, very cool. So let's get started. This is this logo for ZERP Foundation, the little blue monster on the left. So what is ZERP Foundation? It is basically something like Twitter Bootstrap that everybody is familiar with. It's created by this company called ZERP, and they are a very good company, and they do all the design work for a lot of very famous companies like Netflix, eBay, Facebook, Intuit, Mozilla. And they created this framework for responsive front end so that people can design very custom made responsive websites without really having to hard code everything from scratch. So it has all the components of HTML and CSS, templates, code snippets like typography, forms, buttons, navigation. And it's a pretty cool framework. It's somewhat like Twitter Bootstrap that we're all familiar with. And when we say it's a different framework, people get scared, but it's very, very similar. And I've tried to put it in a Rails app, and it worked out very well. So, so what are the differences between Foundation and Bootstrap? It's one of the biggest difference is I will say is the Foundation boasts about is block grid. What is block grid? It's basically normally this is as simple as this unordered list, and you make the list items, and then it is going to render HTML like this. So you don't really have to bother with like padding and margins and all of those. It's all built in. That's a very convenient feature for that. And there's a sizing units. Foundation is kind of fond of this thing called RAMs. I was reading up about it. There's a big debate going on, like RAMs versus pixels. Some people love pixels, some people love RAMs, and there's AMs also. So it's they say RAM is a better, superior quality than pixels, but well, they support pixels too. And if you're familiar with pixel, then it works perfectly fine. And the responsive design, that's where Foundation kind of like has a big advantage over Bootstrap. Everything is responsive, even if you don't define it. That's what Foundation is all about. I kind of put the code in here. Anything not under a media query is going to be considered as mobile. So it is mobile first design. It is very popular right now, so it will be very good for as phones and tablets are getting popular. And the browser compatibility is the same across Bootstrap and Foundation. And the last thing is community support. It's the Bootstrap. It has a huge community supports, and it's of course much bigger than Foundation. So what actually happens is a lot of sites, a lot of developers and designers alike start using Bootstrap. So when you look at a website, they kind of all look like the same. Bootstrap, they have their Bootstrap look. That's it's a good thing and a bad thing. And it's a good thing that if you run into some problem, there's a bunch of resources out there. And it's not really good in a sense that they all look alike almost. Okay, when you look at something, okay, this is Bootstrap, I get it. But Foundation, you can customize a lot more when it comes to customizing everything. And this is what I was showing earlier. Like it's as easy as this, like the block grid. An order list, and then you just put it in there, and then it becomes all the grids. So that's one of the advantages of using Foundation. And another thing is form validation. Foundation comes with form validation, so you don't really have to to go around and do the validate the form, so that like people put in wrong stuff at the wrong places and weak passwords and stuff. So it's a good thing. You don't really have to bother with that. It comes with it. There's this thing called a byte, and it's one of the components. And what it does is, like, if you type in like password, like something very simple, and then like you submit it, it says like, okay, this is required. And the setup is very simple, and it has its own predefined patterns. You can like set up all these like different data types, and this is easy. And another thing is feature foundation is called interchange. So what it is basically when you resize a window, for every different sizes, it will show different content. So I have this right here on the right side. There's large, and it says large. And then if you resize a little more, when it becomes medium, it says medium. And then if it's really small, then it becomes like really small. And I believe it's yeah. Let me do a live demo. This is large, and if you resize it, it becomes medium, and then your size is more, it becomes small. It's like dynamic contents for different sizes of viewport. And the same thing with you can do it with the map too. It's it kind of zooms in on the like particular place. So that's pretty much what it does. Okay, it's called interchange, and I believe the code is down here. It's very simple. All you have to do is like under the image tag, img data interchange, and you put the image URL, and then default, and then you put the image URL for the large, and even if you want to like specify specific pixels for the width, that would do it. So that's a very cool thing about foundation. And yeah, so and a couple other stuff like that's kind of different. And there's this thing called off canvas. I believe Bootstrap has it too, but it's like when you click on it, the site nav bar comes up. There's a way to work around it, but this for foundation, it's come like prepackaged, very simple to implement it. And there's a site navigation bar, and it's very, very simple, like to implement all of these. And there's a sticky navigation. Bootstrap has it too, but this one is the design is a little better. I mean, a little different. Maybe it highlights on different sections you're at. And what else? And I'll come to this later when I go through the other demos. So when we try to install it with, when I try to install it with Rails, there are a few hiccups, but the documentation helps to an extent. But there are a few things you really need to put it into account. Like basically, you put a gem file there. In the gem file, you put the gem foundation Rails, and it's important to put this gem because there's a earlier gem called Zerp Foundation, and it wouldn't work. I tried to do a lot of stuff with it, and I finally figured out, okay, that's the wrong gem. So I found the right gem, and bundle install Rails generate foundation install. That's all from the documentation. This is very easy. And for the I think documentation tells you to like manually do these, for the style sheet and for the JavaScript. But when I did it, when I did the install, it pretty much took care of everything, so I didn't have to deal with it. So it put in these automatically when I ran this Rails generate foundation install. And yeah, and it's there are specific Rails version and SaaS Rails versions that foundation works with. at least this gem works with. It only works with Rails version 4.1.9 and SAS Rails greater than 5.0. So that is something to take notice of. And when you're done, you have to run the bundle updates, because there is some other stuff you have to update along with these, and the bundle install and restart the server, and it's good to go. And for customizations, there is a huge array of customizations available. That is what Foundation is very proud of, and they actually want to portray as a framework that you can customize to very nitty gritty without having prepackaged looks. So but it's very similar to Bootstrap, how we do COL SM9 on Foundation. You do small 9 columns. That's the only difference pretty much. And all documentation is very helpful. And I did. It's very easy, and let me take a look into this, show you this foundation overrides.scss so that you can have an idea. Yeah, so here under assets, app assets, style sheets, this comes with when you install Foundation, and it has all the variety of stuff you can change, all the stuff. One of the things that I try was top bar background color, and it's a top navigation bar, and change to a different color, and I changed right away. And it is kind of recommended that you just change whatever you want to change, and then delete whatever you don't change, and then push it to the GitHub or push it to production, because too many codes it's not good for any reason. And that was that. And these are some code snippets of just to give everyone a feel of what Foundation codes are. They are not so different from what we learned to the Bootstrap. It's it's pretty much the same. This is a top navigation bar, so it's they have a little different names for classes, but it's a title, area, name, and then top bar. And at the bottom you'll see that there's a demo of what I got.
So Maya, real quick, we still see your Sublime text.
Which one?
The foundation and overrides.
Oh, let me see. Okay. You got it?
Thumbs up.
Okay. Sorry about that. That was I'm not really used to sharing with Zoom. Okay, this is a code snippet I was talking about. This is a top navigation bar, and it's very similar to Twitter Bootstrap, and and at the bottom you'll see the demo of whatever this code is, and it's very similar, and just a little more customization options they provide. And I'm gonna move on to I created a 2-column page, and it's easy, just like Twitter Bootstrap. It's not that different, so it's you can get familiar with Foundation within an hour or even less, and you'll be proficient with it already, because the concept is the same. It's all 12-column grids. And this is a image hover effect. And that's one of the things that I wanted to talk about earlier is building blocks. Can you see it? The building blocks.
Now we can.
Yeah. So okay. So now it's like you know, it gives you all the ideas of different things you can do with the foundation. This is one place you should go visit and like have an idea of how to make your site look good or prettier. And like some functions are very cool. So like this one, image hover effect. So like when you hover over it, you get a hover effect, and all you have to do is like this HTML. It's all very Bootstrap like, and I prefer using SESs because it has all the variables and everything declared, and it makes it so much cleaner, the code. And I used it, and it works out very nice on the site. So yeah. And okay. And there's a gradient button, like when you for the button, you can make it like a gradient color. It's very simple. There's you just create a button and then hyperlink it, and then and for the SCSS part, you just do the gradient, declare the gradient variables, and then design the button, and then design the hover function. And I believe that's it.
Cool, good stuff. Does anybody have any questions for Maya?
Have you had issues with turbo links at all?
I did not actually. I saw some people saying that you need to delete the turbo links, but when I tried, I had issues with a lot of other stuff except turbo links. Like I had to figure out like SAS Rails version and Rails version, and it just wasn't working. So that's why one of the slides that I have, it's especially this one here, like this gotchas. Those are just basically the notes that I just jotted down when I was trying to get it running. That's the Rails version and the SAS Rails version. That's where I was having problems.
So we can't see your presentation because you have to like switch it over. But I think I know the slide that you're talking about. So I have a question. How is the integration with Simpleform? Does it work like out of the box, or is it a pain to set up?
It works out of the box. It's not even Simpleform per se. It's just their form, just regular form. I didn't even use any gem for it.
Gotcha. Cool.
It's that's why I was impressed too at the ability to actually validate it. That's pretty cool stuff. It will save a lot of time for a developer.
Cool. Good stuff. Does anybody else have any other questions? Cool, good stuff. Well, thanks so much for the talk, Maya. The foundation seems pretty awesome. It seems in a lot of ways better than Bootstrap. I kind of wonder why Bootstrap seems to be the one that everybody uses, given all the cool things about it that you just showed us. But it's really awesome. So thanks for teaching us all of that, and being able to sort of see the demos and the actual things was really cool too, to see like what is it actually giving you and bringing to the table. Cool. So next up we have Colin. So Colin, you're giving a talk on action cable. So why don't you just jump right in?
All righty. So it's going to be pretty basic. My original intention was to create a cool chat application for the Firehose community, but because of the rawness and alpha status of Action Cable, it just wasn't going to happen. So instead, I tried to break down as many of the parts and kind of give you all some background on what you need to know to start working with it. So really the big question is, what's the big deal? So Action Cable is designed to be a real-time communication framework. And what that means is that you'll have instant updates. So you'll have like an instant chat. So the minute that you send something, you receive it the exact same, well, realistically, it's a little bit later, but you'll receive it almost instantaneously. And the big thing is the integration of WebSockets with Rails. As of right now, there's tons of third-party applications and random ways to hack it into Rails, but it's not really baked into it. So this is the attempt to bake WebSockets right into the Rails application using the API. And so it's going to be a full stack offering, which means that you have a client-side JavaScript and server-side Ruby. And of course, it's just the new hotness in Rails 5. Like I said, it exists because of a high demand for push notifications and real-time features. And Ken and I were talking about earlier, and I think it really is a response to Elixir, which has a lot of this stuff baked right into it. You can use it right out the gate. There's a lot of JavaScript frameworks that do the same thing. Rails has always had, and Ruby for that matter, has always had issues with getting WebSockets to work properly. And that's why they kind of want the out-of-the-box support for it. And because Basecamp, from what it sounds like, they're using Action Cable and WebSockets to implement their real-time chat stuff. So the moving parts. Right now, you have to use Redis basically as a middleman. Puma is going to be your web server that handles the processing of incoming and outgoing. And then WebSockets, and then the channels will be your publish and subscriptions, and then Action Cable itself. So Puma is just a concurrent web server. Rails has an issue with doing multiple connections at once. So people started creating the ability to do concurrent connections. So you have parallel incoming and outgoing. So it really speeds up and handles multiple connections all at once. So when you deal with something like WebSockets and what Action Cable is doing, you're dealing with potentially thousands of connections coming in and out all at one time. Redis is going to serve sort of as a middleman, and that's going to be a data structure. Redis is a data structure server, and that is kind of caches everything in data or in memory. So you have a very fast read-write response time. And then Action Cable actually leverages the pub sub feature in Redis, which is the publish and subscription feature. And then WebSockets are full duplex connections over single TCP IP connections. Basically, all that means is that you have an upstream and a downstream running at the exact same time. You don't have to wait for one coming to you, do a lot of stuff, respond, and then come back. You have full duplex. It's not single duplex. And really, WebSockets are the special sauce behind all push notifications and real-time features. So anytime that you use a chat application, most likely it's being leveraged by WebSockets. And then channels in Action Cable is going to be the pub sub stuff. So you have channels and you have connections. So the channels is going to be the subscriber, which basically is the server, is the publisher. And then anybody that's connecting to a message is a subscriber. So like Slack, for instance, their server is the publisher and all of us end users are the subscribers. And we subscribe to a published channel that they're sending out. So why does this all even matter? Basically, it's just adding all the stuff that a lot of people have been wanting finally and trying to work that into Rails, which is kind of lacking in a lot of departments, and I think Ruby's lacking in a lot of departments. But it's really jumping into this real-time stuff. And it really kind of sets the standard for streaming in the future with WebSockets. So at the time, and what the intention of it is and the possibilities is right now, the only real examples are for chat applications. And I'll show you a quick example of that too once we're done. And then like real-time feeds. So Twitter could be potentially a WebSocket based feed. So it's really instant. And I don't know how Scala does it, and that's what Twitter's using to handle all that stuff. So I don't know if they're still using it off WebSockets or not, but it's pretty instantaneously. And then API calls. So you have basically instant API calls, which would be very heavy in the financial data sector. So dealing with stock markets, I can't imagine anybody ever wanting to build any sort of stock trading on Rails engine, but I guess that was one of the intentions. And then just real-time collaborative software. And I actually sent out a tweet maybe a month ago to DHH, and I thought, wow, this could be a great opportunity to build an awesome video streaming service with Rails, but it actually doesn't work that way. So anything that requires a JSON encoded request will work perfectly. Anything that is a binary sent request, which would be video, won't work with Action Cable. And then I just got some resource here. These are the stuff that I went over. And just that. And I'll show you quickly. So I actually, if you go to GitHub, I just forked the repo. But this is the Action Cable examples. You can use this and set it up, and I did, but I broke it right before the video call, so that's not working. But I built a different one that's not quite as fleshed out as this one is, but it just kind of shows you how quickly it is. So we can just put in username here, and a username here. And because this is all based off of sessions, you'll need, obviously, you need to have two different windows. So I have an incognito and just a standard web browser. So this is just pretty much an example of, you know, the instant feedback between it. It's buggy, it's not perfect, but it's functional. So that's about it. Anybody have questions?
Cool, good stuff. So I have one. So like this is kind of like a nitty gritty question, but most of the time you configure servers only on like production because you don't care about sort of like local host. But due to like you said you needed to use Puma. Do you always need to use Puma, or do you just need to use Puma if you actually need to scale beyond having like 2 concurrent requests or something?
You can use Unicorn as well, but you have to have a web server of some sort. You can't just use the standard Rails server. You have to have something that can process those requests. So they suggest using Puma only because it can handle multiple requests. And actually there's, I can find Puma's website. They have a cool little graph of kind of the response. And I don't know how any of this is going to work with HTTP 2.0. That wasn't even covered. I know the guys are working on that stuff. So I'll just share my screen. So this is the graph of the responses with Puma versus I think Unicorn is in the yellow and this is in Puma. So it's just basically saying how many responses and how many requests it can handle and at once. So if it's just one-on-one, I don't think you would need Puma, but you'll need something. If it's going to be thousands of connections, I think you definitely need Puma.
Interesting. Since it's getting baked into Rails, it'd be interesting to see if they change the default like web server, because like if they're shipping with Action Cable, maybe they'll change from being WebRick to Puma or something. That's really interesting.
Yeah, and I think they might have to if you're going to use it. I mean, right now you have to do a bunch of extra stuff. So I'll just share my screen again and show you, but So like, where is it? So right now you have to run this cable file, you have to run the Rails server, and you have to run Redis. And in the cable file is actually where it's calling Puma. So you'll have that actually in your bin files. So I don't know how they're gonna handle that. There's so much unknown about it that's why it made it really difficult to kind of even trying to tackle any of it.
I can only imagine. Cool. Anybody else have any other questions? Good stuff.
Yeah, I have just one question. While giving your presentation, I was reading also a bit, and I found out that Action Cable is actually based on Fire. That's a WebSocket service that is already used. So is it correct for me then to assume that Rails itself really won't be able to handle performance issues, as that will be handled by Fios? Because as I understand correctly, the Action Cable is just an extra level on the Fire WebSockets.
I believe what their end game is to do it themselves, bake that right in instead of using a third-party gem. I think that's kind of why the call to action was, because there's been so many people like Pusher and a lot of stuff, and then they even have action, or is it called action jobs or something like that, for all their background processes as a response, so they can handle all that. And it's very heavy whenever you run this, is it's running a lot of stuff in the background. So I don't know. I read that too. And again, there's like so little information on why they're doing it, but that's kind of been like the number one go-to WebSocket fix for Rails. So I believe they're trying to leverage that actually into the framework.
Yeah.
So I don't know if they're going to bundle that gem. It sounds like nobody knows what the hell they're going to actually end up doing. Every podcast I've listened to, every tweet I've seen, when Action Cable pops up that isn't directly response from DHH, everybody's like, I don't know.
Cool. Good stuff. Anybody else have any other questions? Cool. So we can jump into the next talk. So Chris is coming up to level up our Git free and talk about Git rebasing. So Chris, why don't you take it away?
Sure. All right, so let me share my screen here. Okay. All right, can everyone see that?
So we can see your whole PowerPoint. So we see like the slides on the left as well as the thing in the middle.
Yeah. There we go.
Perfect.
Okay. So I'm going to be talking about Git rebase. I am not an expert, so don't assume I am. I'm pretty new at this, but I did have to do it a couple times. And the past week, it was actually kicking my butt. And last night, I stayed up and recorded something, and I think I got it to work properly. So I will show you a little presentation later. But Git rebase is just an alternative to merge. So they basically do the same thing, just in a little different way. All right, so Git merge, everybody does. It's kind of the easiest way to merge your commits. And there's pros, obviously. It's non-destructive, which means it keeps all your commits and your branches remain the same. So everything is intact exactly as you did it. The cons are that it's messy commit history. And that gets really messy whenever you have a lot of people collaborating and your master gets changed often. So here I have a little snippet that shows kind of what your commits would look like whenever you merge. It definitely looks like a branch. So then if we move to Git rebase, we see that it looks different. It's kind of a linear commit history instead of a lot of branches. So this makes for clean commits, and especially whenever you're doing code reviews, it makes it easier to follow the commits and how you coded everything instead of having a bunch of merges in there. The negative side is that it is destructive. It rewrites history. So you lose that traceability on your commits. So it's not chronological. It kind of, like I said, it rewrites history. So it makes it difficult if you want a chronological order to your commits. All right. So here I'll start showing you. This is my chess app that I started. I did a bunch of commits, and then I pushed it all up, and it passed CodeShip. That's what all checks have passed, but it is it conflicts with the master. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the whole rebase process here. So I recorded it, like I said, early this morning, because I did not want to do it live, just because I have messed up on it. All right, so you start out, and I always do git status. I guess I learned that from Ken. That's just the smart thing to do. And you want to make sure that you're on your master branch. And then kind of messed up there. I was going to check out, but I don't want to do that yet. Okay, so then I want to pull down from the master, but I want to tell it, sorry. So I want to tell it that it's going to be a rebase. So you do git pull -- rebase upstream master. Okay, and that pulls it down for you. And then after that, you can go ahead and check out onto your feature branch, which for me was my valid move for my pawn. So git check out, valid move pawn. All right. Okay, now that I'm on my feature branch, let's see, I want to do a git rebase master. And what that does is it takes my feature branch and it plops it right on top of the master. So it makes that linear commit history. Okay, when you do that, you are going to get a bunch of nonsense, what looks like nonsense. But if you look at it, it's telling you that there's some conflicts in there. So just like with a merge, you're going to have conflicts. And it's going to tell you like it has trailing white space and things that it is going to warn you about. So then you have to go in and just like normal, you want to clean out the conflicts. So I went ahead and I did that. I'm just going to kind of fast forward through that. Okay, and then once you get everything cleaned out, you're going to want to add that file just like you would, like you were going to do a normal commit. So git add, and the test controllers games controller test.rb file. Okay. All right, and that's showing that the app models pawn was modified. So I added that, git add app models pawn.rb, and then I git status again, and it shows that everything's there. So then you do a git rebase -- continue, which up earlier they give you options, and it says once you fix all your conflicts that you want to do git rebase -- continue. All right, so now it showed me that there's another conflict in the app models piece.rb. So I went there and I fixed that. And okay. All right, So I did my fixing of the conflicts, and then you do git add again, because since you fixed that file, you need to add it. So git add app/model/piece.rb. All right, git status again, or I did not do git status, but I should have done git status. So then I did git rebase continue. All right, and it is telling me here that I have a conflict that still needs resolved. So honestly, I didn't know what was going on. So if anyone here knows what happened there, you can let me know at the end of the video. But I just did git rebase skip because I checked all my files and everything looked the way it was supposed to. So I did git rebase skip. All right. Okay, and once I did that, I'll get it going here, sorry. There, okay. Okay, now there's my commits, okay? So it says fixed bug in code Stephen pointed out and added more tests for capturing as suggested by Stephen. So those are my new commits. All right, and then once you do that, like I said, I went back in and made sure that everything was kosher, because once you push it up there, there's no turning back. So I went in and checked all my files and everything looked good. So let's get it to the place where it should be here. All right, and excuse me. I do a rake before I push it up just to make sure that all my tests are passing, because that's the last thing you want to do is push up failing tests. So there is my rake. Give it a second here. Okay, now comes the dangerous part. If you're in office hours last night, Ken said never do this, but I am doing it. So it is git push, and mine is upstream, and to my branch, valid move pawn, and I forced it. So -F or -- force. And then you push that up. I'm sorry, I'm gonna put in my password and stuff. Okay, and there it shows, that's your rebase, and it shows that it's a forced update. So that went good. Now we're gonna go, okay. So now we're gonna go to my GitHub and look at what's going on. Okay, the checks are pending, but the branch is now up to date. So let me rewind just a little bit here and show you how the, oh no, I'm gonna fast forward, sorry. Once the check goes through with code ship, then I'll refresh and show you what my new commits look like. Okay, so there are my new commits right there. So if you saw in the beginning, there were like 9 commits sitting in my GitHub repo, and now I'm down to 3. So it makes it real nice. And like I said, a clean linear progression of all your commits. So let me go back here. All right, some helpful resources that I used. Thanks to Faisal, and I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong. I had kind of gotten off track, and I looked through so many resources, and rebasing is one of those things where a lot of people do it differently, and it's not necessarily correct. I'm hoping I did it correct, but so I watched this video, and it kind of got me back on track, and I knocked it out like you saw in less than 10 minutes. So there was no problem. That was recording and everything. So this is Ashley Grant's YouTube video. And then another really good resource, just explaining how everything works, not just rebasing, but a lot of technical things, is at ASEAN.com. So that's their link for the merge and rebasing. All right. So some must-knows whenever you are doing rebasing. You need to learn Git Rebase Interactive. That is for your local commits, and it allows you to kind of pick and choose how you want to write your commits. So you can squash commits into one, if they're like 3 little tiny commits that you just made real tiny changes to, you can squash that all down into one. And like I said, pick and choose what you want. Some proper etiquette is never rebase a branch that is shared. So if you collaborate with someone and you're both using the same branch, do not rebase, because it'll work on your side. Your commits will be wonderful, but it will mess their branch up. One of the biggest things I found useful was git rebase -- abort. This will get you out of trouble if you find yourself drowning in uncertainty. It was definitely helpful. I did that a lot when I just felt like it wasn't going to go good. And then git reflog, a reference, it references all your recent commits. So it's kind of like log, but a little nicer. It's used in conjunction with git reset -- hard, and then you use the commit hash that is in the reflog to revert to a previous point. So that one got me out of a big mess. I lost a lot. I saved it elsewhere just in case, but it did bring me back to a point where I could kind of start over. And let me show you real quick what the reflog looks like. Okay, so this is, I did git reflog, and these are all the commit numbers or hashes that you can use and you can commit back to. So just pick one that you know was, a good place for your code, and jump back into that if your rebase went badly. Okay, and my last slide, git push -- force. These are the commits you're looking for. So basically that's it. It just makes it very easy to find and to follow your commit history. And I guess that is it. Does anyone have any questions?
So my question to you is, what are your thoughts on it? Are you going to continue doing rebase all the time versus merge because it's a little bit cleaner, or is it too complicated and not worth the upside?
It's not really complicated once you, I guess, find the proper technique. Like I said, there are so many different blogs and just ways to do it, and a lot of them did not turn out good for me. So I'm not sure if it wasn't right or if I messed it up somehow. I don't know that I'll do it all the time, just because I do like to see some of the, I don't want it all lumped into 1 or 2 commits. I do want to see that chronological progression. So
cool. Good stuff.
I have a question.
Sure.
So you guys are using this, like you're doing this in the chess app that you're working on with everybody, right? So there's like multiple branches happening, like floating around. Can we see your Git network graph? I just want to see kind of like how the other branches then relate to the branch that you're rebasing.
Okay.
And I always lose it. It's in graphs and then network.
Yeah, I know. I was just looking at it the other day, and
I always lose it, but it's cool.
So I think I did rebase. I think I did rebase. Yeah, rebase maybe 2 or 3 times.
Okay.
So where am I? So this is me, the green one.
So I don't think you're sharing your.
Oh, am I not sharing it? Okay, hang on. Sorry. Okay, sorry about that. Can you see it now?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so I am the green one there.
Okay.
That was me. Yeah, I don't.
Where's the point that you did the rebase at? The
Okay.
most recent commit?
Yeah, it's the most recent one, and I think I did it. Where did I do it? I did it one other time. It must have been one other time back here.
Okay. Cool.
So I don't know. This kind of confuses me a little bit.
Yeah, it's
So
cool. Okay.
any other questions? Does anyone know with that whole get rebase skip? Why did I have to do that? Is Ben on here, or is Ben not here?
I think why you needed to do that is I think you might have just not added the file itself when you were doing the rebase. So like as you had the conflict, I think you might have just had like a typo or something when you did git add the file. I could be wrong about that, but I think that's probably the most likely sort of culprit for that, I think. I could be wrong though.
Okay. All right.
I have a question.
Oh, you're super quiet.
Okay. Is it better now?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay. So when you rebase, it basically overwrites your commit history. I'm not sure like how does that work. So like it puts all your commits, recent commits in front of everybody else. Is that how it works? Because I spent like a lot of time yesterday. Didn't get it.
Okay. The way I understand it is it takes your base commit and it kind of takes all of your other commits and just kind of merges them into where they fit nicely. And so it makes it that, I guess it changes your whole base, that it's not exactly the same as what you started with. So it's not the original base. So like I said, rebasing means changing your original and making things fit in nicely. That's how I understand it.
Okay, that sounds okay. Thanks.
Sure.
Okay, I have a question as well. It's the first time that I hear about the Git rebase functionality. Is it something that is commonly used among developers, or?
Yes and no. Some people hate it and some people love it. So you may work for one company that's all they want you to do is do rebasing, and then another company, they don't want you to use it at all because it is destructive and it changes your commit history, and they like to see that progression. So I guess it's kind of 50-50 there.
Yeah, and the other thing that I might point out is a lot of open source mandates it because they really care about the quality of the commit like history. That's something that matters to them. So they'll be like, hey, you need to make sure your commit history, like it has extra stuff in it. I don't want that. I want the one commit that you're putting on top, nothing else. And that's kind of like if you ever contribute to an open source project that really cares about that, they're going to really they're not even going to accept your code if you don't use rebase.
And so do you still see all of those old commits, or is it only the last one, like in your own history?
So you'll see, like it doesn't, I don't know how to word this. Ken, you can help me out if you want to. Yeah. So you can see, if you go into your logs, you can see the commits, like that ref log that I showed you. That has all the commits in there. So I can revert back to a certain point. And there are other ways of doing it. I didn't research all that, but I did read about, like, it never deletes that commit. It's always there. It just kind of reroutes your commit history so that's kind of just on the side. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so like the way that like I like to think about it, which there's multiple ways you can think about it. So it's like depending on how you sort of internalize, like visualize commits. But basically, what works for me is you think about like the step-by-step function of like merge is like, so you write a whole bunch of code and somebody else writes a bunch of code and it gets added to the commit history. And the merge is like a single commit that says, okay, at this point in time, you add an extra commit that says, I update all of this stuff. So you add an extra commit that's sort of like giving Git the permission to update all your code. So that's like a commit that happens. Rebasing is a little bit more work because you're saying basically what you're doing is you're moving the point in time that you update. So it sort of will say, oh, it has a commit over here that I don't know about. Let's apply that one before I add all my stuff. So it'll suck in that one commit. And then if there's conflicts, you have to deal with them. And then it'll do the same thing again all the way up until the end. So then there's never this sort of like this like merge commit that sort of is just saying like, oh, just update yourself, because that merge commit doesn't actually have a whole lot of value in the sort of commit history, because it's like, do you really need that? You could have just applied it one at a time. So each of the commits ends up getting applied, but you end up having to sort of go back in history. And if there's a conflict, you have to be like, oh, well, instead of this actually, even though I wrote this before in the past, I should have wrote it like that if I knew what it would have ended up like. So you sort of actually are changing the history. I think the commit like SHA hashes and stuff will all change as well too. But basically it's just a different way to do it. So that's kind of how I think about it.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Cool.
Cool. Good stuff. Well, awesome talk. I think Git rebasing is something that's hard. I'm not very good at it, so I have massive props for you for getting good at it, because I understand what it does, but whenever like an open source contributor like is like, you got to rebase it, it's like, oh no, the dragons are here. So awesome talk on a super advanced topic. I think it was awesome, and it was everybody learned a ton about this advanced Git stuff. So
yeah, mostly me. Thanks.
But cool. Michaela, do you want to jump up and talk about reading code that you didn't write?
Yeah, sure. So thanks, Chris. That was really helpful, actually. Am I on speaker view? How do I actually do this? Okay. Cool. Can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. So I'm Michaela, and I'm actually a designer for an ed tech startup in Boston. And at this point, right now, I have a weird experience in that I think I've read more code than I've written, just because I work at such a small company that like so many hats get worn. And so I wanted to talk about like my experience of being really new to coding and how I kind of figured out a way to make it a little bit easier to read other people's code. So right now, since you're working on your apps from scratch, most of your code probably looks like this here if you're early on in the course. And so everything's in its own place and it's really proper and clean, and that's awesome. But eventually you're going to hopefully get a job, and that probably involves working with other people on a project that's been around for a little while, or code that's been around for a little while. And so you're going to have to read code that you didn't write, and you'll be expected to work with other people. And so getting into that code might look a little bit more like just like this to you. And so this is pretty common, especially in like a small company, like a startup. And so for me, one day my boss asked me to start working on some of the front end code. And I was used to looking at like this, like mockups. And I had to move into this, which is like our tables and navigating a bunch of code that a lot of people had touched. It's pretty large, so it was a little overwhelming for me. So I leveraged what I did know to kind of help me discover the things that I didn't know. And I sort of have diluted it into 3 steps. And so the first was I built a workflow map, which helped me kind of figure out how the code worked at a high level. So I tried to understand like really well how the product worked, like how the features each kind of fit in and where they fit in. And then next I selected a component of the workflow. So like user sign-on, or we have a grading interface. And then when I started getting ready to actually make changes, I used the search functionality, which is in Sublime, Control-Shift-F, which searches through like all of the files in there to locate a specific snippet. So like in this case, this is part of our interface, and we have the ability to type in a comment. And when I was looking for that component, I basically found out that it's in a partial and like buried really deep inside of our code. Excuse me. And so I don't think I would have found it like had I not just like simply searched for it. And then I basically just edited things continually until I broke them or fixed them or whatever, and made it work for myself. So I kind of suggest that people use a similar workflow if they can make it work for them. And so there's a couple of ways there's a ton of ways to like start getting involved in other people's code, but I put together a few that are easy and I think accessible to begin with. So one is just to start pair programming. So find a friend who programs and ask them if they'll work on a side project with you. One person drives, which is actually coding, while the other person navigates, which is dictating each of the lines. Another option is to go to a hackathon, which is usually a weekend long or like a one-day event. And the topics can get really specific. So like a couple of my friends went to a baseball Boston hackathon in the spring, and all of the projects that got done that day were all about baseball. And it's kind of similar to like a meetup, which is another great place that you can start meeting people who have similar interests as you. So like civic tech, ed tech, Polymer, Node, like anything, different languages or different kind of fields. There's a lot of those out there. And the best part about this is that you're learning and you're increasing your communication skills, but you're also expanding your network. So you have the potential to find someone who might actually get you a job. So another really good thing that you can do without necessarily even like leaving your house is to start working on open source projects. So open source projects are a great way to dive into other people's code, especially people who have a lot more experience than you. And so because it can be a little overwhelming, the best piece of advice I've heard around this is think of it as a learning experience and choose like a learning goal. So for example, if you're interested in a specific company, then check out their open source projects and see if you can work on a certain like feature of theirs, like user sign-on or maybe machine learning. Or if you're looking to dig into a specific framework or a language, then you can go ahead and look at even like trending repositories on GitHub for open source projects. And even that framework that Mayo talked about earlier, by Zerb, is open source as well. So you could use that as an opportunity to not only learn framework, but actually contribute to it, which is pretty cool. So there's a lot of great open source projects out there. So on top of this, the most important part is that you just pick something that you're really passionate about, because you'll be fully invested in it, and then that'll show through in the work that you do. And also it'll be online, and future employers can see that. So on the other side of this is that now that you're part of a community, as somebody who is expecting to be able to pull good code from other people and read good code from other people, you should try and kind of produce the same thing. So follow best practices and make sure to read the docs. And then as well, you should make sure you put notes or comments into your code. And it's actually extremely helpful, not just for other people, like if they're trying to decipher why you built something a certain way, if you're working on a public API or check like using code that other people are going to check out. But it's also really helpful for you. Like if you go back and look at your code within a few months or even a few weeks. So like I went back and looked at my Splurdy app, which is only a couple weeks old now. And there's already parts of it that I'm like, why did I do this? And so I should have made comments to myself and made sure that like I could read it. And if you get into the good, like into kind of habits of best practices, when you start working on larger teams, they'll just like start flowing naturally out of you because it'll be the typical way that you code. So in conclusion, reading other people's code can be a challenge, but and it's a really good way to find out how little you know, but it's also the best way to kind of bridge that gap quickly. So get excited, start working on other people's code, and start jumping in today because it's a great way to lead to new friends, new skills, and could actually get you a whole new job.
Cool stuff. Really good talk. Does anybody have any questions for Michaela?
So not so much of a question, but a comment on open source. So what I've found is that a lot of projects, I saw that you had Netflix on there, a lot of those big projects are hard to jump in for newcomers. Mm-hmm. I've been actually trying to source out like new projects so you can easily jump in. Do you have any tips for that? And then like a shameless plug for the community open source.
Yeah, I'm glad that you did that. I kind of like breezed over the shameless Firehose plug. So Colin's been doing a lot of work around it. So I wanted to give him a shout out. And what's awesome is that like, I don't think is Firehose not actually open source, but it's open to the community. So is like my understanding. So
it's technically open source because we don't have private repos.
Yeah.
But I don't think we should at this point broadcast out.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I do plan on, I got to flesh it out and talk to everybody about it. But I think there's some great opportunity to build out stuff for more advanced applications for everybody to start on.
Yeah. So I actually asked my mentor for like open source projects that he's worked on, and he gave me a couple, one that he started and then one that he had joined, and he was like, you could check both of these out. And I think because they're smaller and they're more localized, like you have a better chance if you're new of like getting your stuff accepted. And so generally, like that's another thing with open source projects is that you always have to do like a pull request, or like when you're not just able to like merge your stuff into their branch, somebody has to approve it. And so one way to kind of be able to get your foot in the door is to work on smaller projects. So I would say like, don't go to the GitHub repo and just like pick the top one, because you probably won't be able to contribute right away. But I think also like another good thing about going to meetups and going to like hackathons is that you'll meet people, like tons of people are working on small open source side projects. And I'm sure like once they meet you in person, they're more than happy to like help you, like allow you to contribute to the work that they're doing, which is really good because it's also a good way to like stay in touch with those people as well.
Yeah, one thing I might add is stuff like typos and like documentation that's out of date. That's like pretty low hanging fruit that probably like is pretty easily doable. So like those types of problems tend to be kind of an interesting thing to do too. And if you can do that on a bigger type project, you kind of get more credit than you deserve, which is kind of cool. So a buddy of mine is like trying to find like the low hanging fruit in some specific thing just because he wants to get his name on that repo. So it's just it's a tactic that you can take as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think also, so I met a company, I know a company that is out of Boston right now, but there's like different ways to contribute, like Ken's saying to an open source project. So it's an ed tech company and they're called Quill, and they do like they're a proofreading app basically for high school students. And so like when you go to their website, they have a paragraph they tell you like how many errors in it, and then students have to go through and try and find the errors. It could be spelling or grammar or whatever. And so they actually are open source in like every way. So even teachers can contribute by contributing content. So like if you write like a worksheet for them, then they count you as a contributor. And so if you get a little creative about like what kind of projects you're contributing to, then you're also probably going to be able to get accepted. It doesn't have to be like, I learned machine learning. Now I know that. So
I think that's why you say about contributing to like content. I think that was a great way for like our community site is you don't necessarily have to contribute to the code. You can contribute as a content creator. And I think that's also a really great way to put your name out there. Mm-hmm. And it's a sneaky way of actually contributing to code because Jekyll is not like others. You have to actually learn certain stuff in it to actually contribute. So you kind of killing two birds with one stone. So I've been looking for like stuff like that as well, where you can do content creation as well as code contributions.
Yeah, you should check them out because they're a smaller company, and so they could like use the help, but they're like a non-profit, and that's why they're open source, because they're like, oh, we're not the only people who are working on this. So it's pretty cool.
Cool, good stuff. Any other questions?
There's this other open source thing called lol commits. I once heard about it. Don't want to talk about it too much.
What is it?
The maintainer is kind of a goofball, though. I probably guess talking to him. Cool, good stuff. Awesome talk, Michaela. It was really fascinating to sort of think about sort of starting out by like you took it sort of the reverse way that I think a lot of people have, because most people learn how to code and then they work on a team. Like working on a team in code and sort of having to build up like the troubleshooting and the all that stuff before you have the foundation. It seems like a monumental task. So really impressive that you even would be willing to approach a problem like that. And I think that's really inspiring to all of us.
Cool, thanks. Yeah. If anybody wants to learn about what it's like to work on code that's been touched by like 20 people, let me know. Within like a couple months.
Cool, good stuff. So Eric, you're up next to talk about creating a killer podcast.
Okay. Hang on. I've got to share the screen, I guess. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Oh, shit. Okay. All right. Can everybody see that?
Oh yeah, it's perfect.
Like full screen. Okay. I can't tell. Okay. So, yeah, my name's Eric. I'm going to talk about creating a killer podcast, and I'm actually going to time myself. I'm going to see if I can actually hit my 7-minute mark because I've been practicing. So quick, like summary outline, there's actually a lot to talk about. So what I tried to do is just break it down to the basics. Like there's the hardware that you need, obviously the software that makes it possible for you to kind of put the whole thing together, label it, get it up there, and get it out into the world. Talk a little bit about capturing the audio, actually building the show, which is probably like the most amount of time that you spend on any given episode, and then just like a little bit about distributing the content, and then obviously like questions after that. So this is sort of like the basic hardware that I sort of collected when I decided I was going to start doing a podcast. And I'll tell you a little bit about the podcast in a minute, but the headphones I'm actually wearing right now, but I can't keep them on because it's making this weird vibration in my head. So I'm going to talk without them on. That Zoom H4n is a digital recorder. I bought that just because I was sort of like doing some work with the agency I work for, and we had to capture some audio. So I had that already. And then the lav mics, those were a little bit pricey, but the reason why I did that is because the podcast that I did, the format was I would actually go and meet the people that I was interviewing, like out in different places. And so this sort of setup made it easier for me to kind of keep things light and, kind of plug it in, set it up. We talk, and then we go. The other cool thing though about the Zoom H4n is it's got like, as you can see kind of at the top there, there's like onboard mics as well. So you could theoretically just kind of place that down on a table and then get, as long as the room was quiet, you could record two people talking. The lav mics make it a little bit better because they sort of focus on the voice, and they are able to sort of cut out a lot of the ambient noise. But this guy is another option. It's actually, these Samson mics are pretty great. I mean, they're used on like stages. They're very cheap. You can actually, I checked some of the pricing on this. You can buy like a 3-pack of these right now for like $69.99. You have to buy the XLR cables in addition to them. So, it's a little bit more expensive, but definitely cheaper than the lav thing. The one thing about having this kind of a mic instead of the lav mics have kind of a low handling noise, which means like if you're moving around, somebody kind of leans back or forward or their coat brushes up against it, it's not going to have as big of an impact as if you're holding the mic. And or if it's on a stand on the table and you kind of like tap the table, you're going to get a lot more feedback that way, or not distortion, but interference. But both mic options are really great for basically for interviewing and for people talking into them, because you've got, in terms of the Samson, it's a super cardioid, which means actually the sound is really focused kind of at the top and the center of the mic. So on the side and toward the stem where you're holding it, it's not going to pick up as much noise. So that's the hardware. In terms of the software, the good news is a lot of this stuff is free or really cheap. Audacity, which is the editor, essentially it's pretty great. I'll show you the interface in a minute, but you basically dump your raw files in there. You've got your timelines, and you can kind of edit everything down, cut it up however you want, and export the things as an MP3. The levelator, which I guess the spell check made it levitator. It's the levelator. It kind of works as a compressor, normalizer, and limiter all in one. Basically, what that means is, if you are out and recording, sometimes I usually wear my headphones while I'm actually talking to the people that I'm interviewing, because you can kind of get a sense if the levels are too high and you're getting a little bit of distortion or clip. But sometimes you can't really hear it until after you're playing back. And the levelator thing is that you drop the file in and it kind of cleans that up for you, so you at least don't have those harsh peaks or pops, and it makes it a little bit better. PodClear is something that I actually just recently found out about, that I have never actually used, but I thought it was really cool because, again, a lot of the podcasts, you get people that you're interviewing and they're remote. What this basically does is they're set up to record. They record into the PodClear software, and what you get at the end is kind of like a file that you can then just drop into your timeline, and you can record, and it's as if basically they've recorded, say, straight into the digital recorder that you had. So that's kind of a cool tool. It's not that expensive either. So it's just good to know about. Super important thing that I actually didn't know about when I first started. And then, at the end, when I had my MP3 files, I'm like, hey, how do I get this information into the actual file? And when it goes up on iTunes so that people can actually see the show art and get a sense of what it is. The ID3 editor, it's free, and that's for the Mac. And I'll show you that too in a minute. And then EasyTag, I think that also works for a Mac, but it's also, you can use it for PC and Linux. So that's just for the metadata for your podcast files, your MP3s. So now capturing the audio. So this is actually a picture of the bar that I interviewed one of my guests in. His name's Dan. He actually wrote he used to write comics, and I worked with him at an ad agency. And so we sort of like went and geeked out about it. The thing about this was the lav mics came in handy because they did help to kind of reduce the noise, but I have a link to the show, so if you want to listen to the episode later, you can still hear like a lot of the noise, because even though it was a small bar and it was pretty intimate, it was actually right by our office. It was, you know, kind of noisy enough. So just to kind of getting the sense of like, you know, if you're going to do it outside or wherever you're going to do it, try to make it a quiet or relatively quiet spot that you can talk. And then obviously, like, the better your mic setup, the better you're going to end up with, you know, better quality audio at the end. I happen to like the in-person interview better because I felt like it was easier to connect with the people. My podcast was about, so basically, like, I work in advertising. I've been working in it for a long time. And a lot of the people, the creatives that I work with, all have like some kind of side gig. Like Dan wrote for Marvel Comics for a while, and he's got all kinds of other stuff going on. My other friend Bruce, who's just the other episode that I'm going to share with you guys, was a musician. He actually like got on the David Letterman show before he got into advertising. He just decided, you know, he's going to give it up and then go do that. And what was cool about that was, like, he actually let me record one of his shows. So that episode, I was able to kind of like mix in, like, you know, a song in between the segments of him talking about kind of that experience. So another next thing is, you know, prepping lots of questions. I think it's kind of important. Like, it's even though you know what you're going to talk about, and you might know it really well, or you might know the person really well. For example, Bruce and I, like, we had known each other for like over 10 years by the time I talked, but I kind of was really glad that I wrote down a lot of the questions that I thought would be interesting for the people that were going to listen to it. Because, you know, when you know somebody really well, you know, you might just slip into that, hey, you know, we're just talking, and then it just becomes kind of possibly really boring for people that are listening that don't know you or your guest, even if both of you are super, like, you know, the most interesting people in the world. Recording more material than you need is super important also, and that's like why I'm saying prep a lot of questions, because you don't want to go overboard, because honestly, if you end up with 3 hours worth of stuff and you're going to cut it down to 30 minutes, that's a lot of editing time, because the first thing you have to do is just sit there and listen to all that audio and then start to construct like what is the pacing of the show, and you trying to put that together. But, you know, if you're trying to get it at 30 minutes, like, you know, 90 minutes is kind of like a good clip, or if you can get it to an hour and 15. And then while you're talking, just like have a little pad and take notes just on like points that you think, oh, wow, this is really cool. Because, like, for example, with Dan, there were a couple of stories that he told. One was about like having his house infested with ladybugs, which I just thought was hilarious. And, you know, it was kind of like a weird story. I'd never heard him tell it before. But so I put that in there, and it was just kind of like a random aside, but it was just kind of fun. So, so building the show. So I'm going to actually, let me see if I can, hold on. Can I do this? Oh, wait. Okay, I'm going to try. So I actually have, oh, wait. I've got to do stop share screen. Maybe run through it again. Nope. Hang on, and I can't hear anything. Right. Where are you? Okay, can you guys see that?
We can't tell. It just loaded up.
Okay.
So
can you see that?
We see your
Okay.
PowerPoint, it looks like, or Keynote.
No, it should be like the Audacity. Oh, I see what's happening. Hang on a sec. Here we go. All right. Now I'm getting the hang of this. All right. So can you see that?
Now we can. Yeah.
Sort of the timeline. So this is sort of like the Audacity interface. And I just wanted to kind of show you, like, this is like the final edit that I ended up with. So like at the beginning, you've got like, this is the kind of intro music. This is like me talking over the intro, talking over it. This is the first song that Bruce kind of performed. And then as you kind of go, so you'd see like I layered it in, and you can kind of see the points where like I kind of did fade crossfades and got that through. So it's actually pretty easy to use. It's relatively intuitive. But you know, as you can see, there's a lot of layers, and it goes down and down and down, and like depends on the way you want to build the show, but you're getting like, you got a lot of pieces that you're putting together. And basically what I had when I got to do this is I had the show, which I recorded, which I think he did 5 or 6 songs. I had the interview that I did with him, which was about 45 minutes because he actually didn't have a lot of time. And then after that, I kind of went through, I listened to the interview, and then I wrote an intro and kind of an outro, and, you know, just so that I could set the show up for the people that are listening to it. And then, you know, kind of recorded that. And so then I had to kind of piece it all together. So this is sort of what it looks like. You kind of export it, and now I'm going to go back here into this and talk about kind of building the show. So you can see the screenshot there too. There's also this is the Evernote that I kind of use. This, you can kind of see the intro that I wrote. So dealing with the raw files. So first you just have to drop them into Audacity, and then you just start kind of carving them up and saving them out. It's a bit laborious, and it can be a little bit boring, but like if you get into the whole thing about like if you get an outline together first with what you think you want to kind of do with it, it could kind of be fun because it's like putting a puzzle together. And then the writing, the intros and outros, it's a good idea if you're going to pre-record stuff. Like there's some podcasts that I know that some of you guys listen to, that I listen to with the ThoughtBot stuff, where they just sort of turn the mics on and they talk, and they've got maybe their bullet list of topics. This is sort of more of like a, you know, it's just sort of like since it's an interview based thing, I was trying to kind of put the pieces together around it. Writing the show notes is important. That's also something that, you know, where you can share links to people's like material. Like I had links off to Bruce's like performance on the Late Night with David Letterman. Licensing is something to talk about that really quickly. There are tons of stock audio sites that for pretty cheaply, like I basically bought like a theme that I kind of liked, that I use for all my episodes. So like it opens and closes everything. And then I can kind of come in and talk over when I do my intro. And I think I bought it for like $30, and then they give you 4 or 5 different cuts, like a 60-second version, 30-second, 15-second. Some of them will even give you the stems if you're really going to get adventurous and you want to build your own kind of remix. The other thing about like this is, again, like it takes a long time, depending on how much material and how you want to build your show. So giving yourself the time to get the edit right is important. When I did this show, I did about 8 episodes. I had about 12 interviews done, but I got to the point where I actually was spending so much time doing the edits, and because I was the only person producing it, that I sort of stopped, just because of the time. It took so much time. I'm pretty proud of like what I did, but it was, again, as a pretty, it's amateur radio, but it was a lot of fun because I got to learn about every single aspect of producing a show. In terms of the show length, I think 30 to 45 minutes is kind of a good length. And then in terms of like ads and stuff, you don't really have to worry about that when you're just kind of starting out, because like, to be honest, it's really hard to get, noticed. But if you put your stuff out on Stitcher, they'll get in contact with you because they'll be like, oh, hey, just letting you know we're here for you. If you start getting subscribers, then they'll start like calling you like about, getting sponsorships or ad buys in there. And then Libsyn, which is one of the podcast hosts, you can kind of set it up so that you'll allow them to sort of insert ads into your show, but that's just an option. So speaking of which, distributing the content. So there's kind of two things to think about. One is the hosting, because if your files aren't up on a server and can't be streamed, they won't show up on iTunes, and Stitcher can't get them either. You don't upload them kind of there. They're not giving you server space. Libsyn is kind of the first and the godfather of podcasting, and you can tell by that little astronaut dude riding that ancient iPod. Simplecast is another one that's been more recent onto the scene. I've never used it, but I really kind of liked it because they also kind of offer you kind of these mini sitelets that are easy to build. So if you don't want to code your own, it gives you a place to kind of host, other parts of like, photos or little write-ups of the show if you want to include that, as well as links. And then SoundCloud is kind of interesting because you do upload your files there, and then because it's like sort of a social media platform, you can just start embedding that everywhere. So in addition to kind of like having it go to iTunes or through Stitcher, you're able to kind of distribute it the way that you want. And so, yeah, my last screen, I've actually put a lot of the links here because I think, again, this is a big topic. There's a lot of stuff and a lot of things you can do. So like I said, there's these 2 episodes that I produced that I thought were the most interesting. Dan Chichester and Bruce Henderson. I have a link to On the Rocks Yelp page in case you guys are in New York and you want to have a visit, because it's actually a pretty good whiskey bar. And then there's links for Audacity, Levelator, the ID3 editor, EasyTag, PodClear, places where you can go download the stuff, and then get more information on the hosting and distribution stuff. So that's pretty much my talk.
Super fascinating. I knew like none of that stuff, and it really kind of like is way more complicated than I ever would have imagined. I kind of imagined that most podcasts were just like 2 people talking and then they just shipped the product, and I didn't realize all of the work that goes on behind the scenes. So it's really interesting. So one thing that I kind of want to just see if like, I think this is what you sort of were getting to the point of, but I'm curious if I'm sort of got the point correctly, is so first you come up with like a raw, like kind of a, like the questions, but you don't necessarily think through how it's going to all fit together. And then you get the actual content and you like listen to it. And then you build sort of like a rough draft. And then you start like pulling things together, like building up almost a storyline and like architecting it all together. Is that sort of the correct sort of gist of it?
That's how I did it. And I think, to be honest, like when I came up with the idea for the show, it was sort of like, it was more about, for me, I was kind of like listening to a lot of like, Radio Lab, and I'm listening to like This American Life, and that they've got like teams of people, and they're, they spend a lot of time sifting through all this material, and then they like edit it together, and then they start kind of inserting all these, transition sounds and things. The first episode I did, actually, I literally I met my friend Brooke at a restaurant, and I put the thing down on the table. The audio sounded like absolute crap. And then it was like so much, and because I didn't kind of have it planned out, it sort of went on, and we talked for like 2 hours, and I couldn't find natural breakpoints. So then what I had to do was kind of like work in these weird transitions, which was like, just kind of weird musical things. So that's at that point when I kind of realized, okay, I got to think about this in terms of like structuring the show, because it's not going to be like sort of like the, giant robots smashing into other giant, like they have their own studio, they have a guest come in, they've got a list of things to talk about, or even the Ruby on Rails podcast. Like those are awesome. Because they can kind of do that. Mine were kind of more about people and telling their personal stories. So I wanted to give them some space to talk, but then at the same time, it's like you have to sort of guide them to the point where you're going, okay, chunk it out. Like I don't want to go more than 5 minutes on a blah, 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 because then people just might get completely bored. Or you just have natural edit points. So that's kind of why I approached it that way.
That's awesome. Does anybody else have any other questions?
Yeah, I got a couple. It's been a while since I did podcast or videocast or any recording. I used to use Levelator. I heard that they killed support, or it's not actively being supported. Is there an alternative to that, or is there do you see future stuff running into issues, or right now it's not even it's just a moot point?
So they did, yeah, it's totally gone. In fact, it's like, the site's been archived. Like, so it's like not, I mean, you can still find it and download the software and it works, but they don't support it anymore. You can kind of like, I mean, you have to work at it, but you can fix the audio to some extent in Audacity. That's when you start becoming like, oh, well, I kind of wish I went to school for radio engineering, like sound engineering. And then there are other tools that are out there that are more like they're prosumer kind of things where, you got to pay like $100 to $200 for like a license. And they sort of kind of automate it in that same way, but the interfaces are super complicated because they want to look more like a Pro Tools kind of a thing. So you end up sort of, which I messed around with for a little bit because I didn't actually know about Levelator for a while. But that just got overly complicated. I mean, you can still use Levelator, and as long as, I guess, like, as long as it's working with whatever OS, happens to be out, that's what I would recommend because it's the easiest one for someone who's not actually trying to literally produce a radio show.
Yeah, I found Audacity was for that sort of stuff. Like when you're working in a controlled environment, like I used to do gameplay stuff. So on me and my buddies, we'd have different channels. It was very easy to level that kind of stuff out. You didn't need Levelator.
Yeah.
But when we did, like when we were at conferences and did stuff like that, or when we were holding hackathons or something, it was a pain to use Audacity for anything like that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, because you got that ambient noise just like kills. Like you don't think it, and even when you have the headphones on, you don't think it's that bad because you're just like your ears are just kind of hearing it. But like once it gets into the file, and it's like, how come I can't get rid of that? So like reducing that noise is like really difficult to do without those tools.
Have you dabbled with any of like the videocast software? I'd be interested on if you've paired any of that stuff with it.
I haven't. I did. I've flirted with the idea of doing that, but then I tend to go, because I work in ad agencies and I'm a producer. That's just what I've been doing. I get to the point where I'm like, okay, now I got to figure out how to light it and how to set it up. And it's like, I overcomplicate it. So I'm just like, I'm going to stay away from that because I'm going to end up buying things I shouldn't buy and spending a lot of time doing stuff. And it's not going to be seen by anyone. So, it doesn't have to be that super quality, unless I'm trying to sell a TV show, which I'm not, because now I'm learning Ruby on Rails and I want to be a web developer.
I have one more question for you, Eric. How much time do you usually spend on production for, let's say, a 30-minute, 45-minute podcast? This is like double, 3 times, 4 times if you produce something of like what you would consider good quality.
That's a good question. So I actually, so for the show with Dan, actually, this is a good story. So the first time we met at that bar on the rocks, and I took the stuff. I had the mics actually were new for that particular episode, which was my third. We recorded it. Something went wrong with the audio file when I was like transferring it, and it corrupted. So half the show is like recorded on the rocks, and the other half was recorded at another diner that we met like a week later. So in total, like we ended up spending like probably about 2 or 3 hours just recording it. And then I would say, like, if I had to be honest, it's not all in one sitting. I would do like 2 or 3 hours at a time, but I probably like spent a good 4 to 6 hours, like, going through the stuff, kind of seeing what I had, trying to write an outline of how to put it together, and then writing little things. And in the Dan one, I was trying to get super fancy because we were talking about, movies and like horror movies that we had both seen. And I had never seen The Thing, and he was giving me shit about it. So I decided to do a little like movie review. So like, then I went and I went out and found footage on YouTube of John Carpenter talking about the special effects guy that he hired that ended up doing special effects for Seven and Fight Club. So then I just like it was just like a whole thing. Like I made like a show within a show. It was nuts. So that one was like crazy. The one with Bruce, he had like 45 minutes or an hour. He totally bolted right at the end of it. I got to record the show, and then it was just about, okay, I know exactly what I have. Most everything that I actually recorded was usable because he's actually a super articulate guy. And then the show was perfect, and thank God, like I was sitting in the right place in the room. The crowd noise was good because it was a small room, and the sound quality was easy to kind of mix. So that only took me probably about 3 hours after the recording of both of those things to get put together. So it kind of varies, but yeah.
Cool.
I mean,
Thank
you
you.
could go down a rabbit hole. Sure.
Oh, you can go down a rabbit hole with pretty much anything, but that's interesting. It's about like 3 times the amount of the recording if you have a really good recording, and then more if things go wrong. Cool. Thank you. That was awesome.
Yeah.
Good stuff. So last but not least is Chris Salvi, who's going to be talking about some of this front end stuff. So Chris, why don't you take it away? I think you're still muted.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Can now.
All right, sweet. So I'm talking about Ken's favorite topic today. Well, one of the favorite topics. And I apparently have my slides. So I actually am not going to be talking about the keyword this, but I'm going to be talking a little bit about new standards in JavaScript. As of 2015, they are on version 6, which is called ECMA 6. So I have this slide called What is the What? And ECMA 6 is just a standardization version, just like a Ruby 2.2, for example.
So Chris, real quick, I don't know if you have slides, but we can't see them if you do.
Oh, sorry. Terrible. Sorry, I'm not used to this. Shoot. I definitely have my slide at full screen right now. So how am I? Just 1 second. God, what am I doing? Okay. Let's exit out of this. Oh, I'm not sharing my screen, that's why. Okay. Let's try this. Okay.
Success. Now we can see it.
Okay. Well, I graduated from Firehose, but not apparently learning how to do a keynote. All right. So let me restart. JavaScript has made some really radical changes in the year 2015. ECMA 6 is the new standard, basically, for JavaScript. It doesn't mean that you need to throw everything out the door, but it does introduce a lot of nice new features, and I'm going to cover some of those today. Some of you guys will and girls will like this because I think JavaScript is almost converging to some of the niceties of more classical, object-oriented languages like Ruby. So I'm going to get into that in just a second. So what is ECMA 6? It's just a versioning of JavaScript. It's decided by a panel of people, essentially. And in my opinion, it's the most significant improvement to the language since its creation. Ken likes to talk about the creation of JavaScript being done within 3 days. I've heard similar stories, but the reason why I want to focus on this actually is partly I've been trying to be an advocate a little bit of JavaScript within the program. I love Ruby on Rails. I love Ruby, but I also see the true value of having some chops in both languages. So one thing I do appreciate is previous versions of JavaScript did not have classes at all. So it made object-oriented programming a nightmare. And hopefully everyone understands what that means. It introduces some really key features that are really nice that should be familiar to anyone that has been working with Ruby for a little bit, like modules, symbols, and something fancy called promises that has been a lot of rage. I mean, a lot of excitement going on about that. I'm not going to be talking about them a lot today just because they're a more advanced JavaScript topic, and I could cover that in like 20 minutes on another talk. So one thing that's nice that even Ken asked me is how can we use, is it practical to use ECMA 6 today? Some people call it JavaScript 2015, by the way. Is it practical to use this new version of JavaScript today? Because, you know, there's always issues with browser support and such, so. The nice thing is it's completely backwards compatible with ECMA 5, which was released in 2009. So you don't have to run into any issues coding this way today. It basically will be compiled into ECMA 5, which is, again, just a standard. And a good resource to check this out is a website called babbeljs.io. It's a good introduction. If you guys want to check it out later, it's a good introduction to some of the major changes that have happened in this new version. So this is basically, if you ask Ken Ever what he thinks of JavaScript, he usually goes into a 5-minute rant. But I think he's sort of changed his mind after I've talked to him a little bit about it. So my first thing is, I tend to not like to use too many words. I like to use a good example. So JavaScript used to have this notion called prototypical inheritance. It's pretty much the only language I know of that actually had structure this way, and I'm not sure of the history behind it, but most people have decided in the year 2015 it makes no sense because it doesn't really mimic other languages at all. It's too much of an outlier, and it doesn't really promote further learning of JavaScript from other languages. So the nice thing is that we, the people who are working with JavaScript, inventing it essentially, say we should just take the idea of classes and essentially implement them in JavaScript because that's what everyone else is using. So as we can see here, skinny mesh, there's a couple key factors here. So the extend keyword is basically using, it's like a mix-it in Ruby essentially. So it is mixing in a module called 3mesh. And what's going on here? So there's a couple of concepts I wanted to cover that isn't very familiar with maybe people more traditionally just focused on Ruby. Super is a definition, it's a keyword, and it looks up to the function. Functions are just methods basically in JavaScript, and it looks up to the parent class function of the same, the thing that is underneath. So for example, when it says super geometry and material, it is looking up to the parent class of skinny mesh, which in this case would be 3mesh. So it's a way of doing, basically inheriting properties from the parent class, and everything else in the constructor is just how JavaScript constructs objects essentially. So just like in Ruby, we have this idea of initialize, right? In JavaScript, you use this dot bones, for example, equals an empty array. And this is how you would initialize this new object, essentially. So again, the object being skinny mesh. And of course, we have our methods or functions on the object or function, however you want to call it. Update, again, is using the super keyword. And all that's saying is, let's look up to the parent class and use that definition of update within our update. So it's sort of a nice way of keeping code, quote unquote, dry. Don't repeat yourself. You know, there's no need to reinvent the wheel if we already have it somewhere on the chain of inheritance. So this is one of the really key big benefits of ECMA 6, and how I use it day to day is this is one of the key ways of using it because it's just a lot easier to use than prototypical inheritance, in my opinion. So another really nice thing is JavaScript can be really weird and stubborn in the sense that it doesn't follow the standards of a lot of other coding languages. Where languages like Ruby have scoping in blocks, JavaScript until ECMA 6 did not have scoping in blocks. It had functional scoping. This could be a nightmare because then you'd see functions within functions within functions, and then you'd have basically all these callback functions, and it could be just really difficult to read things when basically this solution gets rid of all that problems and uses a keyword called let. And all let does is it scopes variables or functions to the block. So in this example, we have a function called f, and then we scope x, so only block scope name. So why do we get an error here? So we see, no, sorry. So basically, let is a way of implementing block scoping, and it's useful because, again, like languages like Ruby, it's just more intuitive. I think functional scoping can get really messy, and it can be hard to read. So it's just another thing that makes it more intuitive coming from other languages that have that block scoping mechanism already in place. Okay, so another key feature that I really want to touch upon is just the idea of modularity. In Ruby, this is basically, well, you do have modules in Ruby, but you usually use mixins to mix in a module into another file, for example. This is really key because JavaScript files tend to be really bulky and after a while not very organized. You want to talk, there was a previous talk given about readability of code. JavaScript can be notorious for being unreadable because people don't know how to organize the code. But this is nice because you can break things into parts. So as you can imagine, you can structure your code based off of certain functions, say, all your math functions, you would keep that in the namespace of a module of math.js. And if I want to import that, what's going on in the second box here is saying, I'm going to import the star selector is just basically everything. Okay, so as an object called math from this directory, from the library math directory. And we're basically now saying we are basically can use the math as the object, and then we can call upon the function sum within other files of the of an app, essentially. So so we import everything. The star selector is just everything as an object math from the file library. Another way of doing it, I just wanted to include it, is you can specify which variables and which functions you want to import just through a hash, essentially. So that's an alternative way. And then you don't have to declare math.sum. You can just declare sum of the function, essentially. So this is really neat because I use this all the time when building Ember apps. It makes the code a lot more readable. I can't emphasize how much of a nightmare it is to go through thousands of lines of codes. And even if there's commenting, it can still be very unstructured, very unwieldy, in the sense that it's all hairy-carry. Some of the stuff is unorganized. The code is rarely blocked together in places that make sense. So this makes it a lot nicer and easier. Okay, so super inheritance. I got to this a little bit earlier, but I wanted to cover it one more time. So we have a simple example of a class called Polygon. And I think this will be intuitive for everyone because it's just basic math, right? We have a polygon and we have a constructor. And this is just exactly like the initialize method in Ruby, right? So we're saying this.name is polygon, this.height is height, this.width is width. Pretty boring. All right. But down here, we introduce a child class called square that inherits from polygon. Essentially, extend means you're inheriting from polygon. It's just like the arrow key when you're doing inheritance in Ruby. So what's interesting here is you would think intuitively that you could call this.height if you're inheriting all the properties from polygon, because this.height is defined in the constructor. But that is not the case. You have to first call the super and pass in the length parameter into basically the super constructor. So super references the constructor of the polygon and then passes in the length twice for height and width. So basically that will then construct our polygon, and then we can call this the height after it. So it's really important in JavaScript, these new class-based inheritance, it's really important that you call the super function before you try to access any of the properties. Otherwise, it just won't work. But as you can see in the function get area, we finally have access to this.height and this.width because we applied the super keyword beforehand. Okay, so this last topic I am very hesitant to go over because it is quite advanced, but I just wanted to introduce it because it is partly why ECMA 6 is being touted as a huge update to the JavaScript world. It's something I'm getting used to right now. But this idea of asynchronous programming, it's a complicated idea, but I tried to find the simplest example in programming, and the simplest example is obviously Hello World, right? We all know Hello World. It's sort of the butt joke of all programming languages. If you can't do Hello World, then you're probably in the wrong area. But so what is going on in this code? So let's first talk about what a promise is. A promise can represent a failure or success. So what is cool about this is if the network goes down or something like that, and the greeting can't be fetched from the web service, you can then register an error essentially as a second argument to the promise. So this is using these things called callback methods. What's going on here, we have a say hello function that is set equal, or not set equal, is assigned to greeting promises variable. Greeting promises, when you use .then, that basically indicates it's a promise. And then we pass in two callback functions. A callback function is just an anonymous function that it's like a lambda essentially. It's an anonymous function that you pass into as a parameter essentially. Feel free to ask me questions about this afterwards. So we pass in two arguments. We have the success argument and then we have the error argument. So we're saying if it's successful, then we're going to console.log the greeting, which is going to be hello world in this case. But if it's an error, we are going to say, oh no, something bad happened. So this is really helpful because promises allow you to handle this dual relationship without it's sort of, not only does it slim down the amount of code you have to do, but it also handles error exceptions. And from what I gather, it allows you to do asynchronous programming, which I guess the best way of describing asynchronous programming would be the fact that you don't have to do things in order. So we oftentimes think of execution being in order and all the steps being completed step by step. But asynchronous programming can do things. You can pause it, you can start it, and it's pretty useful. It's definitely a powerful tool. So this is just a brief introduction to ECMA 6. There are quite a few changes. These are the ones that interest me the most. I like to build Ember apps on top of Rails. This sort of what got me into it. And Ember.js is a framework, just like Rails is a framework for Ruby. And it's pretty standard to use ECMA 6 in Ember apps these days. So I wanted to introduce this to everyone, partially because it is the cutting edge, but it's become, I mean, it's not too cutting edge because it's becoming standardized in 2015. So it's good to know. And I wanted to share some other resources. I'm no expert on ECMA 6 by any means. I use the most basic of basic uses. I primarily use the modularity idea of modules and classes that carries a lot of weight, and you can get a lot done with that. But here are some decent resources I found that were good to read up on. There's this website called tuality.com. Not only is it a good website about ECMA 6, but it is also just a strong website and blog in general about JavaScript and best practices. So I highly recommend everyone check that out. Another invaluable resource I find is the Mozilla Developer Network. And this is just an encyclopedia of JavaScript knowledge. You can search for things. It's fairly comprehensive, and examples are ready for you, and people are constantly, it's open source, so people contribute to it and try to make it the most intuitive and easy to understand as possible. And I wanted to say the last thing is I'm still learning ECMA 6, so I'm you know, feel free to talk to me about it, because I'm going to be needing to use it professionally now, you know, and I want to encourage people to get into JavaScript a little bit if they can. I think it's a powerful language. Obviously, it's the language of the browser. It is essential to a lot of web development these days. And cool things is, like, I feel like, in my experience, I graduated from Firehose last month, and I feel a lot of my Ruby foundations carry over, because once you learn strong practices in object-oriented programming, it really carries over to pretty much any languages. This whole idea of inheritance, you know, using the super keyword, all these things are familiar concepts in a lot of different languages. So what is really important is you build a foundation, and then learning that second language, like JavaScript, after you learn Ruby pretty well, is quite easy, because you start seeing similar patterns, and you start realizing that you're not totally reinventing the wheel here. It's just a different way, different syntax. So I guess I would like to encourage everyone to take a look at JavaScript. I would love to talk to you about more JavaScript topics in the future. I plan on keep on building a blog. I'm starting on Medium to talk about issues I had while learning JavaScript, coming from a Ruby background. And I guess I am open to questions now, if that's okay. So yeah.
Solid stuff. From what you showed us about, like, this ECMA script 6, like, it looks like it's a huge improvement over the standard, the past way. I think the syntax is much better, and it feels good that we're not going to have to suffer through the mistakes of the past. I think this is actually really cool stuff.
It's important, because I think there was an acknowledgement that JavaScript was becoming too isolated from other languages, but JavaScript is so integral to the web that people should be encouraged to learn it, not discouraged to learn it. So I think they tried to really not converge all the way, but tried to make life easier for people coming from other languages to learn JavaScript. Yeah.
Good stuff. Does anybody have any questions for Chris?
So I do. It's basically kind of a more generic question about JavaScript because it's not something I've been. I mean, I haven't been doing a lot of it.
Yeah, of course.
So is this because it kind of said in the sheet that sort of like it's going to be like replacing JavaScript altogether. So is this like it's kind of like an evolution of it, or is it?
It's not replacing. It's I like to think of it as a versioning. So, Ruby has versions that are released. They release usually by 0.1, 0.2, like 2.1, 2.2, et cetera, et cetera. Big releases obviously are single digits. So, 3 might be coming out in a couple of years or something like that. This is just a standard. It's not a new language. It's an extension of the language. It's like a superset of the language. So all the fundamentals, if you're trying to learn JavaScript, if you're watching the videos that Ken made, that still applies. And I don't want to make it sound like those are not important. They are incredibly important, just like any language. For example, like Ruby got rid of hash rockets. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but they're deprecated now. And I think Ruby 2.2, I believe. But that doesn't mean it's like bad to use them. It's just like they just might like fall out of fashion later on. The way I see things is this is an extension of JavaScript. It's expanding the language. It's making things more expressive. And particularly it's making the language easier because it's smoothing out some of the quirks that made JavaScript so annoying to people coming to the language.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I guess when I see there's like lots of, looks like different flavors or versions of JavaScript, and I didn't know if this was another thing or, and then you got the server side stuff, and I'm still new to that. So
I don't use Node. So I'm not the person to talk to. I use JavaScript purely on the front end.
Okay.
But I do use Rails as a backend for my applications that I build sometimes with JavaScript. So, there's tons of good resources I could point you to later on in terms of learning JavaScript. It has a reputation of not being too bad, especially coming from a language like Ruby. So I'd be happy to do that later on.
Yeah, I would love that. Thank you, because I kind of feel like that's the next thing I got to dive into.
Well, yeah, I always say, like, more so than anything, I think it's important. I don't have a mastery on anything. You don't really master a language necessarily, but you want to go deep dive. And I think that's one thing that's awesome about this program. It really promotes that sense of deep learning in a short period of time. You want to dive deep into the Ruby language. Try to read as many books as you can in your spare time. And again, I can tip you off on some ones that I really liked. Don't pick up another language, I guess what I'm saying, until you feel quite good about Ruby, and then it's just a matter of syntax and some other minor quirks that you can learn in literally a month, so.
Cool. Wow.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
So, any other questions for Chris?
So I have one. Not real sharp with JavaScript, but I know that there's a lot of different languages out there, like React.js, and you mentioned Node. How does ECMA compare to those, like, usability-wise?
Yeah, so again, those are more, I like to use the analogy of, like, Rails is a framework, but it's built on Ruby. Node is just a server framework built in JS or JavaScript. So, and React, while I don't have very much experience with it, it's another front-end framework that's built in JS. So these frameworks are supposed to be tools sometimes they feel like they're another language just because of how complicated things have gotten lately. But they're supposed to be tools, once you learn them, to speed up the process of web development, building these ambitious apps that are largely seamless. So basically the important thing to understand is like, you can't really do Rails without, well, some people say you can, but you can't really do Rails without knowing Ruby. I mean, you can't write good models, methods and models. You can't do the chess app. You can't do anything like that without knowing some Ruby. And it's just flat out essential. And the more ambitious you want to build your app, the more you probably need to know the foundations. The same is true with JavaScript. You start with the foundations, and then you start realizing, oh, okay, yes, I'm using JavaScript, but I'm really just building functions, whether I'm in Node, whether I'm in React, or whether I'm building an Ember app. I'm still, ultimately tossing around variables, using functions, which are just methods, essentially. It's really just, it's all built off of the foundations, I should say. Does that make sense?
Yep, completely. Thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else? Did I bore everyone? Yeah. I guess not.
Well, it was a super good talk, Chris. Really super deep into the technical.
Yeah.
I think everybody probably.
Yeah, I don't even know if this was the right talk to do. I probably should have done the why JavaScript talk before going into all the news.
An anti-Ken rant.
Well, no, it's not. It's really, my philosophy is JavaScript is not my favorite language, but it's so used on the web that it's important to know.
Yeah,
it's like learning CSS without learning HTML. It just doesn't make sense, right? So I think these things are good to have in your tool belt. It's certainly marketable, obviously, but it's not as hard to pick up as people make it out to be once you got that first language down. So, when in my experience in the program, I was starting to learn JavaScript midway through the program, and now I use it in my job that I just started yesterday. But I'm building Ember apps in JavaScript, so it's definitely doable. I mean, that's a span of probably 4 months I was dedicating to JavaScript, along with Ruby, along with Rails, and I was doing all of them in tandem, sort of. But again, you're not reinventing the wheel. A lot of the topics are similar. Functions are like methods. You pass in parameters just like a method. You have to use a semicolon, but boo-hoo, that's not too bad, right? So it's just, there's certain syntactical changes here and there, but the more complicated stuff I hope to further illuminate in my blog, and I also hope to just be sort of a guidance for people that want to learn JavaScript just on the Slack channel, or just want to talk to me in general. But there's a lot of good resources out there, and I hope you definitely take a chance. Just take a chance with JavaScript. I think it's a good language to learn.
Good stuff.
Take a chance with JavaScript.
Well, cool. We had a bunch of good talks today, so thanks so much to everybody who gave one. Chris, your talk was really excellent, and I think it just really shed a lot of light on the latest cutting edge of JavaScript. So big kudos to everybody who gave a talk, like always. Always being the last time. The talks were of a really high caliber. Everybody did a really tremendous job. I think everybody learned a lot. And it's cool to see topics of just a wide array of things that different people have expertise in. So thanks a lot to everybody. We're looking forward to the next ones that we hold. So we'll keep you posted about that. And I think we're going to call it a night. So thanks so much for sticking with us so late into the evening. I think it was awesome. And coding on some of the stuff that we talked about. So
Yeah.
thanks to everybody, and a special thanks to Colin too. Colin's still here, even though he woke up at 4 a.m. He's sort of like the driving force behind a lot of the stuff that we've been doing. If you've been involved in like the open source stuff that he's doing, the community site, these lightning talks, basically a lot of stuff is happening because of all the awesome work that Colin's doing. So everybody should just appreciate all the stuff that he's doing for everybody. So thanks, Colin. You're the best.
Thanks to everybody. When I started seeing people contribute, that was really awesome. So that's great that you guys are getting into it. Hopefully we can bring a lot more community stuff and figure out how to get everybody else involved and do these lightning talks more.
Yeah, look at the chat. Everybody's in love with you, Colin. You're the man. You're the best.
Yeah.
I think he also said beast, but I don't know that. That might have been a typo.
All right, guys. Well, thanks so much for coming. This has been a blast. In the upcoming week or so, we'll probably cut up these videos and post them on the community site. And when it's live, we'll send everybody a link to those, probably in the Slack channel or maybe the Google Plus group someplace. We'll post it someplace and you'll be able to find it. So keep your eyes peeled, and we'll talk to you soon.
Cool.
Bye,
All right, guys.
everyone.
See you later.
Bye.